But yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much again for being part of this series, doing an interview for this. So just to start off, can you please state your name, pronouns, and your occupation?
Sure. So my name's Matsuno. My pronouns are they, them, and I am an assistant professor.
Awesome.
Which is fun to say.
So fun to say, because you've been one for how many months now?
Since August, so a few months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is just so exciting. Culmination of a lot of hard work. So how do you identify?
So I identify as queer, as non-binary, as trans. In terms of my race, I'm multiracial, so I'm white and Asian. My dad is an immigrant from Japan, and my mom is white, was born in the U.S. I'm able-bodied, and I have some privilege with my socioeconomic status and education.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So next up, tell me something that is interesting, unique, or fun about you that has absolutely nothing to do with your career.
So I guess my fun fact will be that I have a corgi, a tricolor corgi. So he's black and white and brown, and he's very cute. His name's Riley.
Riley, that's adorable.
Yeah.
Is a tricolor corgi like more rare than just a brown or a white one, or?
I think so, although corgis come in 4 different colors, but I feel like the most commonly like representation is just like the brown and white. So I just felt like I needed to like be like, that's not what he looks like.
Yeah, really specify the unique appearance of your corgi.
Yeah, for sure.
All corgis are just absolutely adorable, so I love that.
So he's good. He's a good self-care, although he is also a lot of work.
As most pets are.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So where do you work and what is your job title?
So I work at Arizona State University, and my job title would be assistant professor. I work in the counseling and counseling psychology program.
Awesome. And what is a day in the life like of a new assistant professor?
Yeah, so a day in the life of a professor could look a lot of different things. So there's definitely no set schedule besides maybe some meetings and then teaching class. So I'm teaching one class currently, which is lower than normal, but just for my first year, I'm teaching one class once a week. And so then when I'm not teaching, I'm either prepping class materials, creating assignments, or I'm primarily doing research. So research can be a lot of different things too. A lot of times I'm writing. I do a lot of writing, and that's something I didn't realize. Like when you become a professor, you basically become a writer. So that was kind of a learning curve that I'm getting used to. But then I'm also in meetings throughout the day with students and mentoring students, or sometimes like different research teams working on research projects. So those are like the main things that I would say I'm doing on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you said that writing, like the amount of writing was a surprise. How did that differ from earlier experiences in your career trajectory?
Well, I think so I've been on this career trajectory for a while, and I'm kind of unique in the sense that I knew like pretty certainly that I wanted to be in psychology, and then I wasn't sure if I wanted to go academia and become a professor or be a therapist. And going into my PhD program, you could do either or, but I was leaning towards research. But pretty soon in, like, I really love clinical work, but like I love teaching and mentoring students. So I feel like that was one of the things that kind of shaped me towards the academic route. But then I think I had really good mentorship around research. And like, I just loved going to research conferences, actually. Like, I'm so nerdy, but I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I remember going to APA for the first time, which is the big conference among psychology, and like being so excited just talking to other students at their posters or meeting professors and like talking about research. So I feel like that just was a signal to me that actually, even though in the day-to-day like writing and research is kind of boring, I feel like overall like I get really inspired and I'm really driven to keep doing the research. So I think but yeah, then realizing that a lot of research is writing kind of happened probably during my dissertation.
Yeah. Dissertation is a lot of writing. So
yeah. So
yeah. Yeah. So I know that one of the things that you've done in your career is a postdoc, which most people do when they're on that academic uh, career track.
yeah.
I would love, for younger folks who are interested in academia to hear, just what an experience with a postdoc might be like and what it is. So could you tell me about that postdoc experience, what it was like in your day-to-day was like during that experience?
Absolutely. Yeah, so doing a postdoc was probably one of the best career decisions I feel like I made. And it's so in the year before I was graduating, I guess that fall, I was applying to academic positions. So I applied to assistant professor positions. Um, a lot of them were more like, so when you apply to be a professor, you can go to a more teaching oriented institution or a more research oriented institution. And I did fairly well for like my first time applying on the job market. I got a lot of interviews, but only made it to the final round for like a couple of jobs, and they were all primarily like teaching at undergrad institutions. But my major career goal was to go into a research position and to be able to mentor like graduate students. And so I just didn't have enough research experience at that point, which most people don't after graduating. To be able to get the type of position that I wanted. So I was able to get this postdoc, which was primarily a research postdoc, for 2 years. And that hugely helped me develop my own line of research. I published a lot of work in those 2 years, which really, really helped my application for this cycle. I got really good mentorship. But it was, as a postdoc, it was like all free time for research. So it is, you have to be really self-driven, but with that extra time, you can do extra training, go to conferences, and then just have time to produce some publications or get some research started. So then when I applied 2 years later after doing my postdoc, I was much, much more successful in terms of getting more interviews and getting to the final stage at R1 institutions with counseling psychology PhD programs, which is what where I wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm happy to answer follow-up questions, but that was like an overview.
What's an R1 institution and what makes that different from teaching at like an undergrad college?
Yeah, so an R1 institution gets most of their funding from research grants that faculty members bring in. So they do really prioritize faculty who are interested in doing research and who have demonstrated like high productivity in research. At an R1, though, you will also have more protected time for research, whereas at a teaching-oriented institution, most of your time will be dedicated to teaching. So, for example, at the teaching institutions, I would be expected to teach 3 classes per semester, which would be almost all the time, like of your time. And then you might be doing like committee work or other projects. So you'd have like a little bit of time for research, but not very much. And then, so at the place I'm currently working, we're expected to teach 2 classes per semester, which is considered 50%. So 50% is teaching and the other 50% is dedicated to research.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is that the academic job search like? Like what was your experience and then maybe as a follow-up, what would you want someone to know who's about to go into it?
Yes. So it was rough. So I don't want to like scare anybody, but it was um, very, very stressful. I think also, in particular for me, I was applying during COVID. So it was also like people will talk about like the job market, and it was a really bad year in terms of the job market because a lot of academic institutions were doing hiring freezes. The other really hard part about academia is that it definitely can feel like there's scarcity, like there's the limited number of jobs, and that a lot of the jobs that you might want might be in like all over the country. So it's hard to I mean, it's possible, but if you wanted to do kind of more of that research route, it's hard to just say I'm only going to look in this one location. So when I was applying, I applied to jobs all over the country. The first time I applied to like about 25 jobs, which is a lot of applications. The second time, I probably applied to about 15. And then it's just kind of this stressful, like imagining your life in Kentucky, imagining your life in Tennessee, imagining like, and so this is also where like being queer or trans comes in, because I feel like that was a really big factor. So I haven't talked about my research interests, but I primarily do research related to trans and non-binary mental health. So it's like very at the forefront of like my work, but then also like I was very openly I was out in my applications because it is so tied to my work, and I also am interested in bringing trans and non-binary students to work with me. So having a environment that would support not only my research but me and my students was like a very, very important part of the decision. And oftentimes like academic departments might be really supportive, but then you're also thinking about like living in Kentucky, right? Or like, which is one of the places I applied and had a really, really great program, had amazing faculty, but was just like, I don't know how this is going to be, you know? And so, and then if it wasn't COVID, like you're traveling all over for interviews. So it's just, it's a lot of unknowns. And I feel like that's really difficult.
Mhm.
Also, sometimes like you don't know, you might get an offer, but you don't know if you'll get an offer from another place that you're waiting on. So the timing is not always like on your side, and you'll have to kind of make a decision. Um, so it's a lot of like looking at your priorities. Also, I'm married, and so it's like also looking at the priorities for my partner, and negotiating that piece too. And she's like followed me to my postdoc and like all around. So, so in terms of like switching into like advice for people on that, I think definitely like looking at values, you know, how much does the type of job matter? And so for me, being at a counseling psych PhD program was like really, really important to me. So, and more so than staying in a certain location because didn't, which for other people that might be different. So you're thinking like location, the program, salary, the environment of the like the department that you're in, but also the geographic location. Um, yeah, there's just a lot of a lot of considerations. But yeah, I'm happy to elaborate on any
Yeah.
piece of that.
Well, I really appreciate you bringing that up because I mean, you're right. Like getting to know your own values and being able to prioritize those. It's important for any job search, but especially one where, you know, it's not like there are openings in all 50 states for multiple professors focusing on trans and non-binary mental health. There's
Yeah.
there aren't that many. So you do have to be able to decide, like you said, the type of institution or the location and so on.
Mm.
So getting to know oneself can be important in that. But I also appreciate you bringing up the way that location can also impact being a queer person at work. Because that's something that I don't think that a lot of non-LGBTQ people realize. You know, they may say, well, this department is accepting, or this city recently passed a non-discrimination bill, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the overall environment socially will be accepting, or that there will be adequate medical care available, and so on. So it does. There are these additional considerations that I think a number of queer and trans people have to keep in mind, and they may be aware, but a lot of you know, cis straight people may not be as aware.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like you're reminding me, like, in my decision-making process, like, the interviews were a really big consideration in terms of, like, the vibes that I got from, like, coworkers. So, like, whereas for other people, it may not matter as much, but, like, to me, it mattered a lot, that I could feel like I could be myself and that I could be safe and that I wasn't going to so you're like definitely sussing that out during the interviews. And I definitely remember like there was one place I applied that had really good research funding, like checked all the boxes in terms of job wise. But when I went to like the faculty interview, it was mostly older white men who I just had a sense like they really didn't understand what my research would be about or would be with me. And then I'm just kind of like asking myself like, okay, how would I feel going to like faculty meetings, you know, with these coworkers, because that's going to be a really big piece. And that was one of the biggest selling points for coming to ASU, is that I just got really good vibes, for lack of a better word, from the faculty, and just seeing that they really valued research on social justice, and that they all like, there's just like little things I feel like demonstrated that I would feel like valued and supported. So
yeah. So you found that it was a really good fit for you.
Yes. And then it also checked my other boxes. So then it was like perfect.
That is just so exciting, because you know, it really sounds like a jackpot that not as many people can find in the academic search, but how amazing that worked out after your postdoc. I think that's really cool.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears a little bit to just to your educational background. So I think you already mentioned you know, a bit about kind of grad school, but especially undergrad. What did you study, and what experiences in undergrad helped you along on your career?
Totally. Yeah. So in undergrad, I was actually a double major, actually got double degree. So I was a music major and a psychology major. So I played classical guitar, and like that's something that I had done since I was 8. And so I just was like, okay, I'm going to keep doing this because it was like a really, really big part of my life. So I went in as music, but then I decided to also do psychology, which was just what I liked the most in school, but like hadn't developed further like any thought about career. So, and then like being a music major was good, but it was also like you have to just go to a really different level to make a career as a musician, or kind of go into music education. And then I think I took like social psychology, and I took a social psychology research methods course, and I really liked those courses. And so that kind of stood out to me. But I think the number one event was actually going to counseling at the College Counseling Center at CU. And yeah, I was just having some family issues and other issues, and I had been to therapy for many years as like before college, but in that moment of like feeling so relieved, like after going to a counseling session, I was like, this is what I want to do. And so, yeah, it's just interesting. I had like such a distinct moment where I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And so then that was my junior year fall of my junior year of college. And that was just the right timing where I could get the experience that I needed for graduate school, because I knew I wanted to go to graduate school. So I was fortunate enough to kind of like plan that out a little bit earlier on. Started volunteering in a research lab in the psychology department, started volunteering at the college counseling center. And then from those experiences, got really good mentorship that also helped me. So I went straight into graduate school after undergrad, which I know is also rare. So I was like the baby in my cohort, but now I'm the baby as a professor. um, but but yeah, so I think, yeah, everybody has those moments of like, okay, this is what or this is the type of work that I want to do that's going to feel meaningful.
Yeah, that's really, really cool to have that like exact moment. And yeah, I mean, going right through may not be the most common, but just think of, how you're have such a great foundation for a long career now.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Yeah.
really, really neat.
Yeah.
So you've already talked, a bit about how your identity intersects with your work, intersects with your research. Tell me a bit more about your identity and work and career and how that shows up for you.
Well, I went in to graduate school wanting to do LGBTQ related research. So I applied to work with a mentor who did LGBTQ related research. And she was amazing. So that's a theme that was like also coming up to me. Like mentors, I feel like, are one of the reasons I've been able to be successful. The other cool thing was that in that lab, we were like the queer lab. And so there was like an extra layer of community beyond being like a research team that was like super awesome. And I continue to this day. Actually, I work really closely with some people who are also in the same lab. One of them is a professor who's also non-binary. So I feel, and they were 2 cohorts above me. So I feel like having them as like a peer mentor, like we're also good friends, but like, that I think was really influential on me. In graduate school is when I was more exploring my gender. And so during some of my graduate school experiences is when I came out. And interestingly, like in counseling psychology, I feel like it is kind of an environment that's very like social justice focused and diversity focused. So I did feel like safer coming out at work than in other areas of my life, which is like sometimes different, like backwards for people. So it can go all sorts of directions. So it's kind of interesting, like professionally, I was doing research on trans and non-binary mental health and like working with a lot of other trans and non-binary students and professors, but then wasn't all like necessarily out with other people who I'd known for a long time or family and stuff like that. So anyway, so I feel like it's a very, like my identity is like super connected with my career because doing the research was part of my like gender exploration in some sense. Research is research. And I got really involved in a lot of trans communities, local communities as a graduate student. And that doing that like advocacy was directly related to like research, directly related to like my community building and identity. So it was like all really connected for me. But yeah, I think one like highlight is even though like at a lot of academic institutions, there's like either 0 trans people or like 1, or there's maybe other queer students. And so it can be very like isolating. I worked on just like a committee with other graduate students. And like 3 of them were non-binary, just happened to be. And then we ended up doing this panel on like what it's like to be a non-binary graduate student. And then that panel like led to like a paper and then like this other project. Anyways, like the story, I'm kind of sharing the story because now that I've kind of had to actively like seek networks and build communities, but now I feel like I have like working on different research projects or papers and collaborating with a lot of other trans and non-binary scholars, and that's like hugely rewarding for me. So it's like I've kind of made work feel like also community bonding. So that I feel like helps too in terms of like motivates me in my career.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that and just how intertwined it's all been, because it's reminding me of when I, worked in the movement, because one of my early jobs was at One Colorado, which
Mm-hmm.
at the time was behind doing the civil unions bill in Colorado. And so,
Mm-hmm.
there was this, some people might say blurring, I might say intertwining of like work and identity and fun, like, to be actually on the clock doing my work while at like a queer nightclub or something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Totally.
So there can be this overlap of work and community to a point where, you know, doing your work may be doing the work.
Yeah.
And
Totally. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that at least what I've seen, a lot of people who are involved in work that serves the community, whether it's research or whether it's community organizing, like whatever that is,
Mm-hmm.
um, there doesn't have to be that distinction of career and life, or
Mm-hmm.
and community, like serving your community and stuff like that. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a cool experience, I think, to have as a grad student as well, to have that same kind of intertwining going on. So
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I feel like that's one of the things that sustains me for sure, because academia can be like very stressful, a lot of work, or like yeah, you could just be sitting at home like writing papers, which is not super exciting. Um,
Mhm.
but I feel like yeah, like being able to meet on those teams and do the kind of research that I'm doing has like been life changing. Just
Yeah.
like yeah, doing qualitative work on like experiences of non-binary people, and then being on a research team with other non-binary people, and us being like, dang, like this is true, or like this quote really spoke to me,
Mhm.
right? And like, okay, we're going to use this now to make change. So it feels like yeah, it's kind of empowering in that it like you feel like you're giving back to communities, and I feel like that's been really important to me.
Yeah. That's so cool. I love that.
Yeah.
Um, well, we're starting to wind down a bit. So, what advice would you give to an LGBTQ teen or young adult who's interested in pursuing this kind of work that you do? Um, and or what advice would you give them about career in general?
That's a good question. So, I think I mentioned um, like finding good mentors. I just feel like relationships um, are like super important, just in life in general, but also in career. So I feel like having yeah, good mentorship, people that you can look up to, I feel like can be very helpful. Like seeing somebody else in their career who maybe identifies in a similar way, like kind of gives you that path, or like, oh, like maybe that could be me. Like you can kind of imagine that
Mhm.
possibility. I feel like that's super helpful. Um, and yeah, I mean, when you're like in college, I feel like I developed a lot of just important like life skills of taking care of myself, building routines, learning how to like study and or like schedule well. But I do feel like those skills kind of lasted me till through
Mhm.
today. Um, so yeah, I would say those two things come to mind. Also, if you don't know your career, like that's okay. I feel like that's for me, it was like I knew, and I've been so motivated and it worked out, but I feel like that is like I am the exception, not the rule. And there's a lot of times where it's like just try to focus on what's the next step. And like you might want to think longer, but also like you can't know the long term, like, for sure. So, but what you can know is like your next step, right? So I feel like that like perspective taking can be important, so it's not so overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I always tell people it's okay if like your metaphorical career path, if there's like a ton of fog and you can just see a little bit ahead, that's okay. You can still see far and go that far.
Yeah. And I feel like there's not like, oh, here's your right path. And then, oh no, you went down the wrong path. Like, no, you took a step in this direction, which is your path. And now you're going to take a step in a different direction, which is like still your path.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not like there's like a right answer and a wrong answer. It's just like, and even if something isn't right, like then you're learning, like that's part of your trajectory, and that's gonna like ultimately get you to be like, you know, in a satisfying career. So
yeah, love it.
yay. Pride in your path.
Exactly. Pride in whatever it looks like.
Totally.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, how can folks get in touch with you if they would like to?
Yeah, so you can find me on the ASU website. I also have my own lab website that I just created. It is, I'm sure you can post it, the empowermentlab.wordpress. So empowerment is like a pun with my name. Because I feel like academics love to have like, you know, a nice acronym or cheesy kind of lab name. But on there, you can find like my publications, a little bit more about my bio, and also some of the resources that I've worked on related to trans and non-binary, and some of it is related to career. So
yeah. Well, and I will definitely give a shout out to the mentoring groups that you have linked there, because as we talked about the importance of mentoring, you know, I think it's really awesome that you set up these ways for people to connect and find mentors to mentor people who are interested in the field. So definitely, I'm going to give a shout out for anyone interested to check those out.
yes. So I was talking about like building that community. One of the ways that kind of was sparked out of that panel of non-binary graduate students was creating these Facebook groups. So there's 2 Facebook groups. They're open to any trans, non-binary, gender diverse, either graduate students in psychology, any kind of psychology programs, or for students who are interested in applying as well. So you don't have to be a current graduate student. So I feel like it is a really great resource, and yeah, I'd love for you all to check it out.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing this again and for everything you shared. And
yeah.
stop